Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you, Simon. I'm Paul Clark. I'm Director of the North Asia Cape. The North Asia Cape stands for the Centre of Asia-Pacific Excellence. There's one for Southeast Asia and one for Latin America, headquartered at Victoria University of Wellington. The North Asia Cape is at the University of Auckland, but we cover the whole country. Our mandate is to promote and build New Zealanders' skills in engaging with Asia, or the Asia-Pacific region. In our case, skills in engaging with China, Japan, and Korea. It's easy when given a mandate like that for the North Asia Cape that we should focus on China. China is a booming place with great attractions, but also great difficulties. I see my task as director of the North Asia Cape in encouraging people to not leap immediately into China, but try out Japan, or better still, Korea. So we're delighted this evening to be working in collaboration with the New Zealand Korea Business Council and with MFAT to organize this evening's festivities. There are two speakers this evening. Ambassador Turner will be followed by a speaker from EcoStore to tell us of the triumphs and tribulations of entering the Korean market. But it's my pleasant duty to introduce Ambassador Philip Turner. Ambassador Turner has an interesting career, a mix of Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, with postings in Brussels and Japan in the past, before he moved across the divide, as it were, into business and spent 18 years in Fonterra, in charge of Fonterra's international efforts and government relations. Philip became ambassador, or returned to the fold of MFAT in becoming ambassador in Seoul. He has a vast experience across those two dimensions, the diplomatic and the business, and will talk to us tonight about the potential of New Zealand's engagement with Korea and Korean business. Philip.
Kia ora tātou. Aino hashimika. It's great to be here tonight. 20 minutes, I'm told. Yes. Is that right? It's my watch. So, as you heard, I have the enormous pleasure to be New Zealand's ambassador in South Korea, and should it allow me to go there, to North Korea as well. But it's just over a year since I was appointed, and as it says on the screen, it's just coming on 4 years since the free trade agreement was implemented. So we thought it would be a good idea just to come and touch base with folk at home, you folk in New Zealand, just to talk a bit about where the relationship's at, check in on the progress we're making under the FTA, and also just see if there's some other stuff out there that we should be aware of, additional obstacles, trade barriers, whatever. So that's what I want to do today. I'll talk for about 15 minutes, and then Hamish will speak, and I think there might be some time for some Q&A after that. So I want to talk a bit about the overall relationship between Korea and New Zealand. I'll talk a bit about the trade side, so trade, investment, education, tourism. I'll tell you a little bit about what the government is doing to help both MFAT and NZTE, as well as tourism and education. And we'll show a video at the end as well, just to wake everybody up. So we'll start off with the state of the relationship. Pretty damn good, judging from that picture. This is Jacinda Ardern on the left. That was taken, I think, in December, right? And as many of you will be aware, President Moon Jae-in visited New Zealand for 2 days in December. Now, that was an awesome visit, and it kind of helps, it sort of illustrates that the relationship is in very good shape. Now, as we all know, Korea has had a spectacular development from being impoverished to now being one of the most sophisticated leading countries and economies in the world. We in Korea talk about 30-50, right? Korea's joined the club of countries which have more than 50 million people and an average income of more than $30,000 a year. There's only 7 of them. And this was a country which, back in the late 1950s, was one of the poorest countries in the world. You guys all know that. So that's been absolutely remarkable. Now, what's also cool is that New Zealand has a really good relationship. In fact, we struggle to think of any obstacles between us. Unlike most other relationships we have around the world, typically there's some things that you disagree with people about, even within your own family. With Korea, we really struggle to see anything we disagree with. And in fact, we see a great deal where we are really on the same page. So what do we do with this relationship? That's my question. So we thought about this for the first few months when I got to Korea, and we've come up with 3 things that we want to achieve while I'm there. The first one is essentially core business. It's the BAU objective. Just grow our business. So that means the core things like trade, investment, education, tourism. Get those numbers growing even higher. And I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. Progress is okay, not spectacular, could be better, but looking pretty good, okay? The second thing we want to do is modernize the brand of New Zealand in Korea. Now, you guys work in this space, you'll probably know it's better than I do, but I think New Zealand has a very positive brand to Koreans. But it's basically about clean and green, sheep, and hobbits. Now, I love hobbits, but there's more to New Zealand than that, right? So that's a very positive platform for the relationship, but we want to go more than that and to kind of present to Koreans a more sort of up-to-date, sophisticated version of New Zealand, which talks about things like the people, not just the sheep and the hobbits, but the people who live here, about the experiences you can have when you come to New Zealand, about innovation and technology and how New Zealand can be a business partner. So the tourism folk talk about how it's pretty easy to get people to come to New Zealand once to look at Milford Sound, photograph some sheep, go to Hobbiton. But they won't come twice to do that. To get them to come twice or 3 times, we need more than that. We need to give them an experience and a reason to come back again. And typically that will involve people. It will involve doing things, experiencing things, perhaps bungee jumping or adventure tourism. Eating and drinking is a really good experience. Māoritanga, the whole Māori component of New Zealand is very interesting to Korean tourists. So there's a bunch of things we can do there to modernise the image. The third thing we want to do is kind of political. These 2 got on very well for a couple of reasons. They recognise that they are probably the only 2 leaders, progressive or centre-left leaders in the region. There's not many others like them out there. So they get on very well. And when they met in Auckland, they talked a lot about their aligned economic agendas. President Moon talks about an inclusive society. He talked about income-led growth. Both leaders share a commitment to reducing inequality and creating a more diverse and inclusive society. So they're bonded on that. But internationally as well, New Zealand and Korea are extremely like-minded, right? This is a pretty turbulent world we live in at the moment. You've got the US and China in a trade war. We've got the WTO under real pressure. We've got bad behaviour from a lot of leaders in a lot of countries around the world, putting pressure on global trade rules and the way we operate. So we're on the lookout for people who share our commitment and our values to things like democracy, the rule of law, open markets, rules-based trading arrangements. And when we look around the world, there aren't a lot of countries that share those values, certainly not to the extent that Korea does. So when they spoke in Auckland, they both agreed they have a lot in common domestically and a lot we can do around the world in terms of building, so defending the rules-based framework and reinforcing that to the advantage of both of our countries. So just to kind of expand on that a bit, if we go back 20 years or so to when I was last at MFAT, we used to think two things about trade. One, we used to think that markets were going to get more and more open on the whole, and that the rules around trade were going to be generally complied with and would gradually get stronger and more powerful. Well, now those assumptions are under challenge. You can see the WTO struggling with its dispute settlement system. We can see the US-China trade wars. We've got Brexit. It's tough out there, and those assumptions don't necessarily hold any longer. And Korea is particularly vulnerable. The Koreans, as you know, like to talk about the country being the shrimp between two whales, right? And they kind of envy New Zealand because we might be a shrimp too, but the whales are further away. But we've got the same interest. So Korea has come under enormous pressure lately and the risk of being collateral damage, particularly between the US and China. So we share this common concern, this common interest in the rules-based framework. We also have the same concern about diversifying our economies away from what some might see as over-reliance on a couple of big markets. So President Moon has introduced the new Northern policy and the new Southern policy, which is trying to do that. New Zealand's introduced our Pacific Reset. And when they got together in Auckland, that was one of the things they talked about. Are there synergies between these policies where New Zealand and Korea can work together in the region? And one thing in particular that we've just been talking to Korea about just in the last week is CPTPP, which is maybe way too many letters in search of a meaning. But what used to be the TPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive, thank you, Trans-Pacific Partnership. So this is an example, we think, of where New Zealand and Korea can work together. New Zealand's already in, Korea is thinking about it. We think it would be a powerful gesture if Korea was to join. Korea kind of had a chance of joining the original TPP and chose not to. And some people regret that. And even though the United States is not in, we think this would be one quite powerful step that Korea, with help from New Zealand, could take in the direction of strengthening the rules-based framework. Haven't quite persuaded the President yet, but we're on the case. So that's the relationship. Now let's get down to a few statistics, because I know you guys love statistics, about the trading relationship. Now, again, I don't need to tell you guys this, but Korea is a serious country, right? It's New Zealand's 5th largest export market, 11th largest economy in the world, depending on how you count it. It's also the 6th largest trader in the world. And it says 70% of the food is imported. So big opportunities for New Zealand. How are we doing? Well, 4 years in, the good news is that trade is at an all-time high. So two-way trade is now 5.2 billion. And last year alone, trade in goods was up 33%. Now, that sounds really good. Most of that was exports from Korea to New Zealand, which went up 45%. And most of that, can you guess what it was? Nope. 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 Somebody said it? Yes. Oil, refined oil products. $1 billion worth. So this is Korea leveraging its fantastic ability to process at scale some of the world's biggest oil refineries and plants and sell those products down to New Zealand. Oil's huge. Then you've got iron and steel. It's New Zealand's largest supplier of iron and steel. And then you get to cars, electronics, Samsung Galaxies, Hyundai cars that Paul's looking for. So Oddly, Korea is selling even more to New Zealand than we're selling to Korea. Still, this is not a bad thing. New Zealand exports last year, what did I say? Up 17% last year. Overall trade was up 33%, and that compares with total outward growth and trade of only 7%. So we're doing pretty well, and we can see the results of the FTA now starting to kick in. The best example is food and beverage. And New Zealand's got a great reputation in the country for food and beverage, and that's starting to show the numbers. So here's some numbers. I won't go through them all, but you can see some spectacular successes. Kiwi fruit, unbelievable. Honey, up 200%, as well as the products you can see on the screen. So, and that's leaving out things like wood, which remains our largest export to Korea. It's not really growing. In fact, it's decreased slightly last year, but it's still nearly $500 million. But there's great growth in there in some of these other products. So a lot of this is being driven, we think, by the FTA. So now tariffs for many items are starting to come down nicely. Wine, for example, is now zero tariff, it was since 2015. Kiwi fruit goes to zero next year. Cheddar cheese goes to zero in 2021. So some good products, good progress there. And it's being supported by some good stories of industry collaboration. The best story is probably the kiwi fruit one. Again, I think you guys know this story. Zespri have 100 growers of kiwi fruit in Jeju-do. They want 200 more. They want 300 growers. And kiwi fruit sales are doing really well. But so is things like avocados. I know you can't buy an avocado for less than $10 in New Zealand, but they're not much cheaper in Korea. That's up 250% in 3 years. So goods is doing pretty well. Let's try services. Next slide. Oh, nice slide. I'll come to tourism education in a minute. I want to say a brief word about investment, where we're not doing quite so well. Investment really is the hole in the relationship, where given the size of the Korean economy and the opportunities in New Zealand, you'd think we would be doing more, but the numbers are small. Korea is New Zealand's 15th largest destination for investment, and New Zealand is Korea's 17th largest. So surprisingly small. But there's some good stories in there. Who knows about Skyline? Who's heard of Skyline? Yeah, a few. Yep. It's a really cool story. So Skyline is the company that runs the luge in Rotorua and Queenstown, and they were the first company to bring the luge to Korea. They have a lovely investment in South Korea, Tongyong, which has already sold 2 million rides. It's fantastic. They are about to expand into Busan, and they hope to announce where that's going to be later this year. Let's talk about education, which I know many of you are interested in. As you know, New Zealand has a great reputation, not just for being a safe and nurturing and clean environment, but for providing top quality education. I think you know the story where Korea is our number 4 source of students, 7,500 last year, producing about $300 million in income. I think it's fair to say that there have been some pluses and minuses recently. The Christchurch terrorist attacks obviously would be of concern to all of us, but the impact we're seeing so far in Korea seems to be relatively limited. Conversely, I think air pollution in Korea and to an extent the ultra-competitive education environment continue to be drivers for students looking for a different way to get themselves educated. We'd like to see more education going the other way as well. There's something like 100 New Zealanders enrolled in tertiary institutions in Korea, 94 in fact, and 20 of them are on the Prime Minister's Scholarship for Asia, which is cool, but it's a pretty small beer. And in the sector, as again you probably all know, Education New Zealand's main focus is the schools sector, so whether that's primary or intermediate or secondary, driving growth in that sector. They're also very keen to spread students around the country and take advantage of the regional schools that we have around New Zealand. Tourism. Tourism is doing okay, but actually numbers have been relatively slightly down over the last 6 months. Not quite sure why. Probably a bit of cost involved, but losing a little bit of market share in the short term. But it's very exciting that Air New Zealand are flying into Seoul from November this year. This is going to be awesome, because for the first time we will have a major corporate with investment, with the ability to invest in brand and marketing, and what they are marketing is New Zealand. Korean Airlines is a great product, a great airline, but they market 75 countries. Air New Zealand will only be marketing New Zealand. So I'm personally convinced that this is going to transform the tourism sector. We already have nearly 90,000 Korean visitors a year. Air New Zealand's new flights alone will add 35,000 seats between now and June next year. I expect that Korean Airlines will respond. We're probably going to see a lot more capacity, and we'll probably see some pressure on airfares. Good pressure from a consumer point of view, right? So that's great. Less well known, who knew Jetstar and Jeju Air are flying from last week between Seoul and the Gold Coast. That was pretty cool. Only three times a week. But no Australian airline has been flying to Korea. Right? You've got Asiana and KL flying into Oz from Seoul. Now, this so Jetstar coming into Gold Coast, we're hoping that will actually result in some onward traffic to New Zealand as well. So that's all very positive. So some good stuff there. Briefly, what is the New Zealand government doing to help you guys? A few things to talk about here. First of all, you have, I think, on your seats, a copy of what we call the Go-to-Market Playbook. This has been put together by NZTE, New Zealand Trade Enterprise, and it's kind of a guidebook to exporters, especially to people approaching it for the first time. So some of it's fairly obvious to people in the room. We put it together with EY, Ernst & Young, Korea, and there are two versions. You've got the short version, what we call the condensed version, so feel free to take those home. There's a much longer version with over 100 slides in it. Be warned. And that's available through NZTE for NZTE customers. But as you'll see in there, it's got some good stuff in there about how to approach the market and what can go well, what can go badly. On the MFAT side, we have a thing called the Tariff Finder, which is online. If you're interested in finding out what tariffs should apply to your products, this should tell you. And then we also have a thing called tradebarriers.gov.nz. Again, a website that where we want you folk, exporters, to tell the government when you find a barrier. And our undertaking is that we will give you an initial response within 48 hours, and within 6 weeks, we'll give you a plan to deal with it. That's not necessarily going to fix the problem, but it'll be a plan, because a lot of these things involve negotiation with the government. These can take a long time, and we won't be able to fix everything. But we do want to make sure that we know what the problems are, and that we're doing our best to help you fix them. So that's what the government does. Now, I wanted to finish off with two things. One, just to tell you a little bit about what's happening over the next 6 months, and then we'll finish with a video. So there's a few interesting things in the relationship. I talked about Air New Zealand. That's going to be very cool. Air New Zealand are just putting together their own operation in Korea, putting together an office, and I'm sure they will be doing a whole bunch of launch and promotional events over the next 6 months. They haven't decided what they're going to do, but I think there'll be a ton of stuff, and we at the embassy will be working closely with them. Well, in addition, we have two big wine festivals coming up as soon as I get back. There's one in Seoul on the 25th of May and 25th, and then in Busan on the 8th of June. I don't know if anyone's been to those. They're fantastic events. It's they've become kind of glam events where, you know, the rich and pretty come out to play, We like that. And we've got 25 New Zealand vineyards taking their products up there to show off. So they'll be great events. We've got the Rugby World Cup happening in Japan in September, October. We think there could be some spillover from that. People going up to Japan who might want to kind of just pop across to Japan, do a bit of to Korea, to do a bit of business as well. And we would encourage that. We're also expecting a few New Zealand ministers to come through Korea later in the year. Nothing's confirmed yet, but we're hopeful, possibly including a visit by the Minister of Trade, which would be really cool. We also have the largest ship that the New Zealand Navy has ever built has been launched in Ulsan. It's the Aotearoa. It's a naval tanker, 25,000 tonnes of ship built by Hyundai Heavy Industries. That will be named at a ceremony that the Governor-General will attend in October. So that'll be a cool thing as well. And Hyundai, they run the world's biggest shipyard. They're a serious company. This is a serious ship. It costs $500 million, and that doesn't happen every day. So there's good stuff happening in the relationship. And finally, there's an awful lot of stuff happening on the people-to-people front. Now, you guys are all part of that. One of the things I loved about going up to Seoul last year was discovering how effective and active the people side of the relationship is. That's you guys. So here we've got you folk, we've got KNZBC, we've got KCCI, we've got Kotra, we've got a bunch of things happening here. At the Korean end, and again, you probably know, we have a dedicated New Zealand Chamber of Commerce, the Kiwi Chamber, we call it. It's a bit of a problem because the Koreans think that refers to fruit. But Korea is one of the few places where we have a standalone New Zealand chamber which is active and effective. We have a large New Zealand alumni network, 600 young people who typically went to school in New Zealand or university, and then they go to Seoul for nightclubs, nightlife, and make a bit of money. But they're a powerful network to both countries, and they operate on their own without too much help. We support them as the embassy, but they do a great job. There's also the Australian-New Zealand Association. They held a big ball in Seoul on Saturday night, which I was unable to go to. But again, big occasion, got the New Zealand community out and about. So there's lots going on there. And a lot of that is fueled as well by the fact that there are so many in the Korean community here in New Zealand, 40,000 or so, we think. That, again, huge resource for us all. And that flows into things like the amount of things that are going on in popular culture, creative industries, and so on. So we know, for example, that the Kumyu Film Studios are owned by a Korean family. And they have been shooting some fantastic movies, including The Meg, which made $600 million last year, and including the Disney movie Mulan, which is about to be released later this year. And I understand they have a full pipeline of further major studio movies being shot in Auckland at a studio under Korean ownership. It's pretty cool. There's some neat things happening. Who likes Weet-Bix? Excellent. Well, the good news is, from about later in June, you'll be able to buy Weet-Bix at Costco in Korea. So there you go, there's a consumer breakthrough. So things like that are happening. But in addition, the people thing is really, really interesting, right? So one of the biggest drivers, I think, of interest in Korea in New Zealand at the moment is K-pop, right? You all nod. You know what it means, right? Okay, so who knows how many K-pop stars and bands have New Zealand connections?
세대 5포 세대 그럼 난 6포가 좋으니까 6포 세대 어른과 어른들의 의지가 없다면 우리 싹초식처럼 해보기도 전에 죽여 너 아닌 척하지 마 눈에 보이지만 넘어가는 걸 What did you do yesterday 고민 척하지 마 영거래지만 넘어가는 걸 What did you do yesterday 대기실에서 앉았어 생각했어 언젠가 난 또 빛날 거야 언젠가 난 또 해낼 거야 I'm 대기실 대기실 I'm 대기실 대기실 Locked up in 대기실 대기실
Who's heard of Rap Monster? 1, 2, 3. Who is a member of what band? Which is what? The world's biggest selling band, right? So Rap Monster studied English in New Zealand. Who's heard of Blackpink? Right? Again, one of Korea's biggest girls groups. So Jennie from Blackpink.
And Rosé was born.
And Rosé, we found out, was born in New Zealand as well, and then educated in Australia. So there's cool connections that we have already as a result of the Koei community, and there are great opportunities to leverage those and to strengthen the relationship. Anyway, you get the idea. So thanks all for listening, and I'll hand over now to the next speaker. Thanks.